We were sitting around in my old treehouse, this ragged edifice of my early childhood, and picking over the candy that we had gotten this year, when we heard the familiar sound. Everyone in town knew the sound. It had something to do with the old recycling center, or it had something to do with the old wastewater plant, or it was animals in the dump, but whatever it was, you could hear it circling the town like a predator on quiet nights. It was the clinking, clanking sound of metal, like tin cans on a string banging together, and it always gave me the shivers. "What's that sound?" asked Jeremiah. Jeremiah, though we called him Jerry, had only been in town for about a year. He didn't know about the old town legends or the stories that we'd all grown up with. To him, the sound was just an odd metallic clank, but to us, it was something our parents had told us about since we were young. "Don't you know?" Cameron asked, as he tossed aside a Werther's Original and grabbed up a bite-sized Kit Kat. Pickings had been slim this year on candy. We didn't know if it was because of the layoffs at the recycling center or because of the increase in shipping costs that made the groceries so expensive, but what we did know was that most of the grown-ups were out on their front porches enforcing the 2 or 3 pieces of candy per kid rule. It had meant that we'd gotten a sad collection of fun-sized candy bars and old lady candy, the latter not terribly appealing to a bunch of 14-year-olds who were probably too old to be trick-or-treating anyway. "No," Jeremiah said. "That's why I asked." "That's Tin Can Tommy making his rounds," Joel put in, before opening a box of malted milk balls and shaking them all into his mouth at once. "Who the hell is Tin Can Tommy?" Jeremiah asked. Cursing was something we had discovered only a few years ago, and it was still new enough that it was something we used every chance we got. "Tin Can Tommy is a local legend. In the late," Cameron began, but Joel waved a hand and pointed at me. Let Tyler tell it. He's better at it than any of us. Go on, Ty. Tell him about Tin Can Tommy." I was honored to be elected as the storyteller, and as I took the wrapper off a tiny Hershey bar, I began the tale that my grandmother had told me when I was barely 4 years old. In the late 40s and 50s, there was a string of murders in town. You see, in 1942, a drifter had been going around abducting and killing children in the town. This was when the railroad still ran through, so you occasionally got drifters and hobos that came through looking for work or just looking for a place to crash before they went somewhere else. Well, this fella had a taste for murder, and he had killed 5 kids before the locals finally figured out who it was. Now, there was some speculation on whether or not they got the right person. Some people said that Tommy was innocent and that they just decided to accuse him because he was a homeless guy. Some people said it was actually one of the guys in the mob that went to get him, and he was just covering up for his own sins. Whatever it was, they took Tommy and hung him from the big tree in the middle of town. They say he hung there for a whole month before he finally rotted down to nothing but bones and clothes. The townspeople congratulated themselves. They had taken out another dirty vagabond. But that was not where the story ends. All 3 of them leaned in close, even though Cameron and Joel had heard the story before. It was one of those stories that everybody heard, but nobody complained when it was retold. It's the kind of story that, even though you know it can't be real, you can imagine that it actually happened. Everybody has a relative who claims they were there. Everybody has a grandpa or a great uncle who claims that they were in the lynch mob that went after the homeless guy. Everybody has a cousin or a relation who was on the police force back then, who went and shook their heads at the poor old tramp and said that that sure was terrible. It was the kind of story that you could easily believe was true, even if you didn't really believe it right on top. For the next 3 years, kids started going missing. 2 or 3 a year would just vanish, and only the children knew what was really going on. Many of them told their parents how they'd heard someone whistling and calling their names from under their windowsill, and they supposed that a few kids must have even went with him. It was always a man in a long, dirty coat, his head covered by a red bandana, and his face covered in shadows. He would call to the children and tell them to come down and play, or to come down and see what he had in his bag, and the ones who did were never heard from again. The children told their parents about this, but none of them believed them. Most of them thought it was just scary stories the kids were making up, and that there was no real truth to this strange whistling traveler. Some of them, the ones who probably hung Tommy from that tree, even thought they were just making up tales based on what they had heard about the drifter himself. They all laughed and shook their heads and told the kids they needed some better stories. So the kids decided that if they were going to be safe, they'd have to take matters into their own hands. As I told the story, I could hear that clanking sound as it circled around in the woods outside town. I could hear it because it sounded like it was getting closer. We'd all grown up with the sound, so we were just kind of used to it. And sometimes, when the wind was right, it did seem like it moved, or like it was getting closer to where you were. It didn't matter how close it got, because it wasn't like anything ever came of it. We all knew to stay away from it, whatever it was, and the sound was as normal to us as catching the bus in the morning or saying our prayers before bedtime. So, the children got together. Not all of them, but enough of them to make a difference. There were about 12 of them, and my grandmother claims to have been one of those children. She says they decided that if the adults weren't going to keep them safe, then by God, they'd keep themselves safe. They would catch this man and make sure he never hurt anybody ever again. And they set up a plan so they could do just that. These 2 boys, the Tyson twins, set up a tent in their backyard and let it be known that they were going to have a camp out a week before Halloween. This seemed to be the easiest way to get the attention of whoever this was. He had taken most of the kids off the street after dark, or he'd taken them from in front of their houses at twilight. He didn't go into people's houses. That would have been dangerous. So the easiest way to get got was to be out after dark or be lured off by his whistling. The wind must have been exceptionally strong that night, because I remembered thinking that the whistling and the clinking sound was coming from the woods right behind my house. It made a great backdrop for the story. I could see Cameron and Joel leaning in as the story hit its stride, and Jerry was almost shaking as the Snicker bar he was holding sat forgotten. Sure enough, as the Tyson twins camped in their backyard, they heard a whistling and heard someone calling their name. They didn't leave the tent. They continued to stay in with the zipper held tight, and as the shadow of the man appeared across the side of their canvas, they were filled with fear. The fear didn't last, however, because 10 kids popped out of a nearby bush, and my grandmother says they beat the man to death. They had hammers and sticks and tools of all sort, and they came at him like the wrath of God. They beat and pounded on him as he fell to the ground, and as they stood over his body, they were sure that they had finally put an end to this. How wrong they were. That clinking sound was getting pretty loud. I'd never heard it get quite that loud before. It sounded like it might be right under my treehouse, and I was tempted to go to the window and see if some stray dog had got into a bunch of tin cans or something. A week later, Mickey Forrester went missing from the stoop of his own home. No one had seen or heard anything, but his mother said that he had been there one moment and gone the next. Mickey Forrester had been one of the kids to arrive to the meeting, and the rest of them were scared that now they had drawn targets on themselves. So the 11 kids met again and tried to figure out what to do. It was obvious now that the creature was not human, but that was almost more distressing. How does one kill a supernatural creature? Still, they tried again. They set another of their friends, a girl named Tessa, to sleep on her back porch, and gathered to ambush the specter. He came, because of course he came, and once again they fell on him with pieces of wood and garden tools, pocket knives and slingshots, and everything else they could find to attack him with. He was unsurprised, and it almost seemed as if he let himself be beaten to the ground. They beat him, and even though he lay still again, they went to get an adult to see the man who was taking the children. They left some of them to watch him, but when the adults came, he disappeared like smoke on the water. The adults were cross, telling the children that this had gone on long enough. In that, the children agreed with them. So the kids decided that if they couldn't kill the man, someone they were thinking of as Tommy, since that was what the bum's name had been, they would at least find a way to warn others when he was near. So for the third time, because the third time is always the charm, they set up a trap, and they attacked the man who arrived to snatch one of their friends. The old ghost laughed and told them this was pointless. Eventually, they would not be so vigilant, and he would take another child. He said the town had taken his life, and now he would continue to take its children. So the kids told him that they couldn't kill him. They knew that. So they would give him something that would let others know when he was close. So they beat him into unconsciousness. And then they wound a string full of tin cans all over him. They wound him with so many cans that he looked like Jacob Marley when Scrooge saw him. They tied so many knots that he would have no hope of getting them off. They wound the strings together so that no matter how much he tugged and pulled, he couldn't get them off. Then they left him there, certain he would never bother anyone again. In that, the children were correct. Not that he would never bother anyone again, but that he would never take a child unaware, ever again. For now, every time he came near the town, you can hear him clank from a mile away. The wind will blow his cans, the trees will snag on his ropes, and he will forever be a prisoner of the town. It was decided that if he meant to stay, then he would be just as miserable as the children who he hunted. We were silent as the story came to an end, and I realized that the clinking I had heard had stopped. I looked over the edge of the treehouse, but there was nothing down there to be seen. The yard was empty. The only sound were the leaves rustling in the trees, and it appeared that Tin Can Tommy had gone on his way. He'd probably come to hear a story. Maybe he even liked being immortalized in tale. Whatever the case, we could all rest easy, knowing that he would never have us unaware, as he had taken the children in my grandmother's time. We would always know he was near, because it was impossible not to hear the clinking and clanking of Tin Can Tommy.
Good evening, everyone. It's me, Dr. Plague. Thank you so much for joining us for tonight's show. If you think you might like a little more spooky in your life, then please feel free to click on one of the videos we have up here. Maybe look at one of the playlists if you're trying to get caught up. I know, there's so many videos on the channel. There's so many series that are going at the same time. Sometimes you just need a little refresher course, and I gotta say, I always enjoy the views. If you're not subscribed, feel free to hit that subscribe button. Maybe hit the bell so you don't miss anything. We upload a lot on this channel, so you won't want to miss a single story as they come out. If you'd like to support the channel, you can click on the Amazon link down there. There's quite a few books in my Amazon account. You can have a look, and if you'd like a signed copy, get up with me through email, and I'll be happy to work something out with you. Also, there's links to my Patreon, and you can become a member on the channel if you'd like your spooky a little bit early. Patrons and members on the $5 tier get their videos 12 hours early. That's in the morning as opposed to in the evening. Patrons at the $10 level also get a signed copy of my book anytime I write one. Speaking of my patrons, you should see them appearing right now. Just wanted to take a minute to say how much I appreciate all of you. Patrons, subscribers, however you give to the channel. I really appreciate everything you do, and it truly touches me that you have chosen to support the channel in this way. Well, that's enough for now. Till next time, Dr. Plague, signing off. Have a wonderful evening.